right, welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My name is Clayton Craddock, and today's guest is Damien Bassman, a legend of New York City. Welcome to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast, Damien.
Thanks so much, Clayton. I'm super excited to see you and chat.
I have so many questions to ask you, but the first thing I normally ask is, where are you from?
I'm from DC area, from Northern Virginia. Fairfax is where I was born in North Carolina. I lived there till I was 3, but I grew up outside of DC in Fairfax, Virginia. So
When did you move to New York?
I moved to New York after grad school.
Well,
And,
let's go back to the beginning. You grew
yeah,
up in Fairfax. Did you go to elementary and middle school and high school there?
yeah, all of it. Yeah, same. One house my whole life. Yeah, it was great. It was an amazing thing because I was close to DC. We used to go here, the National Symphony and the Airmen of Note, and the military band jazz bands. My dad used to take me to all those concerts when I was a kid, so I got to see like Lionel Hampton when I was a kid and Louis Bellson when I was a kid, and it's pretty amazing looking back the people that I got to see. I was super lucky. I never got to see Buddy, but he came through there. But and then also like the National Symphony, we would go to all the like outdoor summer concerts growing up, and so it was pretty great. Yeah.
What got you started playing drums?
My parents were both amateur musicians. My dad played like all the reed instruments, and he played in like the like community theater and pickup orchestras. He still does that stuff now that he's retired. He does more of it. And my mom played guitar and piano, like folk guitar. Like she used to do like protest concerts during this Vietnam War and stuff, like on college campuses. Um, so they were both musicians. So they gave me a bunch of toy instruments when I was a kid. So I had like a guitar, a piano, a drum, a trumpet, a clarinet, little toy ones, and I liked the drum the most. So uh, when I was in like I think it was the summer between second and third grade, my dad signed me up for like group drum lessons, and after a year of that, the teacher said, you know, you show some promise. If you're interested, we should think about doing private lessons. And so I started taking private lessons with him, half an hour a week, and he was my teacher from third grade until I graduated high school.
Did you start out on the drum pad and the pad was like tilted?
Yep, a slanted. I still have it. It was actually an old Ludwig slanted metal pad with a thick slab of rubber. And my teacher, his name is Sam Evans, um, and he played in the army band, but he loved teaching. His teachers were Shelley Mann and Jim Chapin,
Oh wow.
and I just get chills thinking about him. Like he, it was like he was, I don't know. I mean, I'm using this like colloquially, but it was like he was like an angel in a human body. He was just like this little guy that was just pure positivity, and he just taught kids all day long, 6 days a week. And he and his wife had this group called the Patriots in Northern Virginia, which was like a colonial marching group, and they had like groups for each age range. So like if you were a little kid, you just like marched with like flowers and like a little flag, and then when you got to the older thundering drums, which is what I was in, you play. There was just like a tenor and snare drums, and you would march and play this series of cadences. And then the older kids, there was a fife and bugle and drum corps, and it was just so cool. And every year, the at the like end of the year awards ceremony, and we would do like parades and things like that. And every year at the end, they would have an award ceremony, and the Marine Band Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps would come and play. And if I don't know if you're familiar with those guys. You ever seen the videos?
A little bit.
They're badass. They're still badass, and they played on these old, huge rope Soisman rope drums, and they wore the colonial garb, and they were like no expression, no movement, just hands, these beautiful traditional hands, and they just played all these traditional just fife, bugles, and drums. I think now it's just fife and drums. I don't think they have the bugles anymore. I never see the bugles and stuff, but it was my dream in life to be in that group when I was older. Like that was like everything I wanted was to do that. But I
Did you
got
ever?
those things changed when I got older, but
I was about to say, did you ever wind up playing in that group?
I didn't. Because when I got a little older, my they had the solo and ensemble festivals for like, elementary school band and high school band. And when I was in fourth grade, I did the solo ensemble, and the judge that year was Garwood Whaley, which you might recognize the name. He wrote a lot of the like Bibles of like primer snare drum and mallet and timpani handbooks, and he owns Meredith Music Publications. He's really incredible, and he was the president of PAS for several years, and Percussive Art Society, and he was the judge. And apparently, I mean, I wasn't aware of it because I was in fourth grade and I played a snare drum solo, but he took my dad aside afterwards and said, if he's still playing drums in seventh grade, this is my information. Give me a call. And so my dad, being the Jewish father that he is, kept that card and in seventh grade contacted him, and I like went and took my first lesson with him and left the lesson in tears because my main teacher, Sam Evans, who I kept taking lessons with the whole time, was just this like ball of love and positive encouragement, and Dr. Whaley was much stricter and
Was he like the teacher in that movie Whiplash?
no, he was nothing like that. That was my high school band teacher.
Wow.
That's a whole nother story. That movie Whiplash was very real for me. When I saw that it ended, I was in the fetal position and my wife like, "Are you okay?" And I was like shaking. I was like, "This was my life."
Wow.
But anyway, no, he just expected you to do well. There was one week I never forgot this lesson. There was one week that I went, and I'm lucky. I've always been good at sight reading. I'm still really good at sight reading, but for mallets, it quickly got too hard for me to sight read. And there was a week that I went and started my lesson and did snare drum, and there's no problem, and did timpani, no problem. And I started trying to hack through like whatever the George Hamilton Green lesson was for that week, and it was just a key that I hadn't practiced. And Dr. Whaley, he stopped me, and he was like, "Did you practice?" And I just couldn't lie, and I was like, "No." And he goes, and he just put his sticks down and closed the book, and he said, "I'll see you next week." And I was like, and he was like, "I'm not going to let you waste my time or your parents' money. I'll see you next week." And it was such a good lesson to always be prepared. And I never didn't practice again. It was a really great lesson. I'm super grateful for him, but not at the moment. I wasn't super grateful.
Wow. Did you play in marching band in junior high?
I did. I had to. It was a requirement, not in junior high, but high school. I loved the Patriots. I loved the like rudimental marching stuff that I did when I was a kid. But no, I was super duper lucky. Fairfax County Public Schools, when I was there, I don't know what they're like now, but they were like the top. They were the top 3 school systems in the country. It was Dallas, New York City, and Fairfax, Virginia, Northern Virginia. And so my high school, like the graduating class in my high school, my freshman year was like 1,500. My class was 732, and we were the smallest class they had ever had.
Wow.
So it was a huge school, and the arts programs in my school were phenomenal. There were, in high school, there were 4 symphonic bands and 3 orchestras and 4 choruses and 2 guitar ensembles and 3 jazz bands. And then there was a marching band, and the only way that they got the good players to be in the marching band was they made it, if you got into the top symphonic band, it was mandatory to be in the marching band. So it was like forced marching band, which made it less fun, although it was my only social life because I was a band nerd. So, but it was tricky because I had learned traditional when I was a kid, and it was the first time I ever had to play match. And so I had to learn to play match, which was hard on me. And also I was like shorter by like 2 feet than everyone else on the snare drum line. Cause I got onto the snare drums when I was a freshman, and everyone was tall, and they had to like break a harness and put it back together so that it was small enough for me to wear. And my head was almost level with the drum next to me. Wow. And I didn't know about earplugs. And so it was not the best situation my first year or 2 in marching band, but I did do it, and then I grew to love it. And I love like the old guard. Like I love rudimental drumming so much. That's like my bread and butter. That's how I learned. Like Will Coxon was my first book, and I love rudimental drumming still. It's still what I do as my warm up before my show is play 3 cans and play Downfall of Paris. And but that type of marching band, and it also wasn't cool marching band like Drumline, the movie, kind of like it wasn't like funky cool
You know,
stuff.
it's
It was
funny
like
that movie was kind of my life to a certain degree. I
yeah.
mean, I wasn't our marching band at Howard was good, but we weren't as good as a lot of other HBCUs. But
Yeah.
anyway, I don't want to talk about me. I want to
No.
ask you the question about the fact that you started out on a pad and it was slanted, and your snare drum in the pit that the last show that I saw for you was SpongeBob. It's slanted. Do you still play traditional grip?
I do, yeah. I still remember you saying like aggressively traditional. That's what you said, and I love that. I tell people that all the time. You're like, that's an aggressively traditional
And
slant.
it was like this. I was like, oh snap! I have to go back and learn how to play traditional. But man, we'll talk about that. That was so
Yeah.
much fun to play. So you did you play a lot of drum set in addition to orchestral and marching band?
Oh yeah. No, I mean I learned pad, and then I started the private lessons with Mr. Evans, and then after I don't know what his like pedagogical process was, but at some point he let me start taking drum set lessons, and and it was awesome. And I listened to. I mean, the first music I remember listening to and loving was the Beatles, and like the first thing I ever bought with my own money was Sergeant Pepper on cassette when I was like 5 years old or something like that. But my dad listened to classical music and jazz, and my mom listened to like Motown and funk and blues, and so I had like a really amazing. But what neither of them really listened to was rock. The only thing they both liked rock wise was like the Beatles and Cream, and so I got that in the middle, and that was what I first gravitated towards. So, yeah, I mean, I just loved, listening to that and playing along with Ringo and that stuff. But then I also was like, because my mom, I was listening to like Fifth Dimension and Muddy Waters, and so I was also playing along to that stuff when I was a kid, which is super. I feel super lucky now that I got that was part of my first feel, and that I was playing along with and stuff. So I was always playing drum set, and then and taking drum set lessons. But it's so different when you're taking lessons and then we're actually playing the music. Like
Were you in any bands in high school?
oh yeah. When I was in junior high, none of the high school drummers wanted to play the musical, and so the junior high band director talked to the high school band director and said I've one of my kids could do it, and they were like, he's in junior high, he can't do it, and he's like, no, he can do it, and he can read music, and so they were doing Music Man actually. I remember that because I remember when we were reading through, and I was like, why is there a Beatles song in the show? Like because Till There Was You is in Music Man, but I knew it as a Beatles song first. but but yeah, so was playing that musical, and then the guitarist and bassist who were playing that in high school were like, "Are you in band?" And I was like, "No, I'd love to be in band." So then I was like, I got to be in a band with these high school kids, and it was so cool. And we were called Strawberry Jam, like so many high school bands. Somewhere there's a cassette that we recorded in his basement. But yeah, it was fun. We played the Kings and the Beatles and the Who, and I think at the time it was like we played played the Cult, and I'm trying to remember if there's anything else contemporary that we played. Led Zeppelin, it was mostly classic rock stuff that we were playing. I did that, and then I was in another band, the Brazilian Train Surfers, and we the Battle of the Bands at my school was like a really big deal. It used to be held in the gym, and they would rent a full stage and full sound and lights and smoke machines, and like every high school from the area would come to our Battle of the Bands. It's really funny. After I lived in New York for a couple years, I met someone that was, oh dude, Mike Aarons used to come to our high school's Battle of the Bands. Like he
Really?
was like, wait, that's where I know you from. Like I saw your band play at Robinson Ram Jam
Wow, that's
when we
funny.
first met, actually in New
That's right.
York.
He did grow up in the D.C. area.
Yeah, he's from Reston. Yeah, and I'm from Fairfax. But yeah, it was a big deal. It was really exciting, and there we got second one year with the Brazilian Train Surfers. We did We
Wait,
did
Brazilian trans surfers?
Brazilian train surfers. No,
Oh.
trans wasn't a word back then. Train surfers. It was, and we did. What did we do? We did a Led Zeppelin medley. We did Metallica 1. That
Wow.
was
Yeah.
that was
You have a,
the only time in my life I got a double basement pedal just so I could play that
yeah, I was about to
song.
say, wow.
I got it for that, and then I felt my foot getting weak, and I got rid of. And I mean, the pedal's still in my studio, but I haven't used it in 25 years, 30 years. I can't remember the other song. Anyway, it was cool. And then my senior year, I put together a jazz quartet, and we won with the jazz quartet, which was pretty cool. But I remember there were every year there was always one or two really great go-go bands because we were right near DC, and I can hear in my head the guy that was playing the like the bongos with one of the bands, and I play that like anytime I get a chance. I love that so much.
Do you ever try to play along to that stuff? It's so
Oh
much
yeah,
fun to play.
yeah, it's so much fun. Those pockets are so bouncy. When I think of
Yes.
you're playing, I think bouncy, and I totally hear that music in that. You know, it's like it's so bouncy and so much fun. It's like both fat and bouncy at the same time somehow. You know.
Fat and Bounce. That's a good name for a band. So, who were some of your drumming influences growing up,
Oh man.
other than your teachers? Like,
Yeah, my teachers were really huge. Definitely early on for me, I think the first music I really loved was jazz, but not like bebop. I came to that like 30 years later. Like I loved swing and I loved small band, like early small band stuff. So it was really a lot. Still to this day, probably Joe Jones and Buddy Rich and Shelly Manne are three of my biggest influences. I just think like Joe Jones and Shelly Manne just like they're like melodic soloists in my mind the way they play. And I mean I got my record collection right here, and like the Shelly Manne section and the Joe Jones section are like the biggest. Like any record that I can find with them on, I buy just to hear what they do with anybody.
wow.
So yeah, Joe Jones and Shelly Manne and Buddy Rich. I still remember my dad. It was the only time I got to stay up late. My dad would come and get me out of bed whenever Buddy was on Johnny Carson, you know, and like bring me into his room to watch. Um, and then Gene Krupa just for like that feel, you know, the like just that. I loved something that he said. I remember reading an interview with him when I was a kid, and like he said like if he was playing and nobody was dancing, then he knew he wasn't playing, you know. And I think of that all the time, and that influences me in a major way when I play still. But yeah, Gene Krupa was so those four like jazz drummers, and then when I got older, I think one of my hugest influences is Steve Smith and Dennis Chambers. Those two guys. I think it's just probably an age thing. Like they hit when like you know we were in high school and like all that stuff was happening. But it was funny. Steve Smith was a bit of an accident. I had asked my parents for like remember the early DCI VHS videos. So I asked them for a Steve Gadd video for Hanukkah, and they got me Steve Smith by accident. And I was like, well, I'll watch it, you know. And then I was like, and then he became like probably still my biggest influence of all time. Like just like the way he plays always, and like whenever I'm in doubt about when I'm creating like drum parts, I'm like, what would Steve Smith do? Like he just like every part he made is like so perfect in you know my opinion. So Steve Smith and Dennis Chambers, and Dennis was a huge influence that the hybrid thing that I do. You know, like he and Alex Acuna were I saw them doing that in the 80s, you know, because Dennis would play kit and then have the timbales over here, and Alex would play kit and have congas over here, and that's why I put a djembe and bongos next to my drum set as soon as I started playing things, was because of those guys. Yeah, so you can blame them for all that stuff. You have to do that when you're playing my parts.
Interesting.
Yeah, because yeah, it was that was a big influence. Well, it was funny because I was playing with this group called Absolute Ensemble, which technically we still exist, but we haven't played in several years. But it was a major influence for me, and a lot of the cats that you saw that I played with are because of Absolute. But it was a chamber orchestra that did crossover projects, and so like when I first started playing with them, I subbed on one tour. There was a drummer and a percussionist, and on one tour I subbed for the drummer for the first half, and then the second half of the tour I subbed for the percussionist, and the rep was all Frank Zappa stuff, and so I had to learn like the Ed Mann book for half of it, and I had to learn the Terry Bozzio book for half of it. That's still the hardest music I've ever played ever. And then the next time that we went out, neither of them could do it, and so I just like put the two setups together, except for the mallet parts, and just played both of them at the same time because I had remembered Alex and Dennis saying that's what he did with P-Funk, was that, you know, they didn't have couldn't afford a percussionist sometimes, so he would just play the percussion parts while he was playing kit. And I was like, well, I guess I'll do what Dennis did and put it together like that. And so that was kind of like when that whole thing started for me. And it just happened to be like right after I moved to New York. It was really early on. So
wow.
Yeah.
Did you, after high school, you went to college?
I did. I went to Cleveland Institute of Music. I had fallen in love, thanks to Dr. Whaley, I had started to fall in love playing timpani. And then my senior year of high school, I auditioned for something called the National Symphony Youth Fellowship Program. I had been playing in the American Youth Philharmonic since junior high. I had gotten into that, and that started my love for classical music. And I was just really, really lucky. There was just so many opportunities around me. My dad forced me to go to the audition. I cried the whole way there, and then but I got in, and the conductor and artistic director was a violinist in the National Symphony. It was Luis Haza, Cuban, amazing musician, and kind of like Mr. Evans, he was just like full of love and optimism and positivity. And he put together this, you know, youth orchestra, and it was amazing. I mean, so many of the people I was in youth orchestra with are principals in major orchestras all through the States and the world, you know, like, and actually a lot of them were from my high school. My high school was really rich in talent. It was just a public high school. But so I was playing in that orchestra, and so I was really loving classical music a lot. And then my senior year, I got into this youth fellowship program, and so as part of being in that program, you got to go once a week. I got to skip school once a week and go watch the National Symphony rehearse on Thursday mornings. And then I got private lessons with the timpanist in the National Symphony, who was Fred Begun, who had studied with, you know, Saul Goodman, who Dr. Whaley had also studied with Saul Goodman. And so I was really lucky. I had really amazing teachers, but they were all, Freddie was real old school. He was like, I have nothing but love for that guy. He was so beautiful. And he's also an old Jewish guy. So like, I felt like he was like my grandpa, and he was always calling me Booby. And he had a bowl of chocolate chips next to the timpani during lessons. And he's like, whenever you need a little energy, you just pop a few chocolate chips and you're ready to go. And guys, they're such amazing characters. And but he was like all about like, if you don't love it, then you're not playing it right. Just like a lot of really great lessons about like, about where it's coming from, the heart and feel, and one of the things that Dr. Whaley told me about, and I was also playing when I was in high school with the George Mason University Orchestra, because now they have a really great music program, but back then they did not have a very big one. And I auditioned and started playing with them. Man, I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but it's all pertinent, because when I was in like ninth grade, they didn't have anyone to play their musical, and since I had started playing with the orchestra, they asked if I'd be interested. And this was also like kind of talking about it, I know this is what led to it, is the first one I did with them was Kiss Me Kate, and that also I had to combine the percussion and a drum set book. So I put the glockenspiel, like Bill and Miller does. I put the glockenspiel on top of the bass drum and had the percussion next to me, and then just used the floor tom and like physically copied and cut and pasted a book together to play that part. But so I was like playing with that orchestra there, and one of the other people in that section was this guy named Aubrey Adams, who was in the Army band, and he was like, if you want to pursue a career in music, he said you should go to a conservatory. He's like, if you're not sure, because I didn't know if I wanted to play drum set or classical, I was like, part of me wanted to play, sessions and be in a jazz club every night till 4 a.m. And part of me wanted like an orchestra job with a townhouse in Georgetown and like just live a life like that. And so I was really split. And Aubrey said, if you at all want to go the classical route, you should go to a conservatory. You can always practice drum set on the side and keep up your chops. And so I took bad advice and I auditioned for conservatories, and I ended up going to Cleveland Institute of Music. And part of the draw there was the dean at the time was a jazz pianist, and you know who Andy Kubashevsky is.
Mm-mm.
He was the drummer for Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor, and he's from Cleveland, and he had gone to Cleveland Institute of Music for classical, but then he started doing sessions and got too busy, but he was the dean. His name is Marshall Griffith. He was his drummer for all of his jazz work, and Andy had just gotten busy and sort of was not available anymore, and so the dean called me up and said, "Listen, if you come here, I'll use you for my jazz trio." And I was like, all right, that's great, you know? And so that led me to go to Cleveland. But the very first day of school there, I was like moving my drum set into like the corner of one of the student, and there was like a grad student there practicing Porgy and Bess, 1,000 times on the xylophone. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, Mr. Yontra said I could set my drums up here." And he looked at me and he goes, "This isn't Berkeley." And then like put his headphones back on and I have the theme of almost crying here, but I like almost burst into tears. I was like, I chose the wrong school, but it ended up being great because my teachers supported it, even though the peers didn't. But it worked out because I was the only one there that could play drum set, and so like any drum set gig was mine that came through the school. For the first 2 years that I was there, nobody else even played drum set. They like it always blew my mind that somebody was like I loved classical music and wanted to play it, but I found my way there through like Neil Peart and Stuart Copeland and Ringo and Keith Moon. And someone was like, "I love that triangle part. I'm going to be a percussionist." I mean, that's always what I joke, but I'm like, why did you go want to be a percussionist without playing drums? It's so weird to me. But whatever works for people. But I felt that it really helped because since I approached like classical percussion like a drummer, like about groove and feel and sound and pocket, I think that it added a lot to what I was doing. So I'm really grateful for the split background, even if it did cause some emotional trauma for me for a few years when I was there.
I think that makes a big difference when,
Yeah.
coming from a different perspective, and you definitely have a certain feel that separates you from people that just focus specifically on one thing. So
Yeah.
it helps you get a lot more work that way, I believe.
Yeah.
After college, you went to grad school?
I did. Yeah. College was Cleveland School of Music was amazing. I chose Cleveland because I heard Cloyd Duff play at a PASIC convention when I was, I think, a junior in high school, and I had never heard a sound like that. I mean, it was the most beautiful tone and sound I'd ever heard. And then because I was studying with two teachers, with Garwood Whaley, and so I kept taking drum set lessons from Sam Evans my whole life, but it just became just drum set. And I started taking like the legit percussion from Dr. Whaley and then timpani from Fred Begun. So I had 3 lessons my senior year a week. But when I heard Cloyd Duff play, it totally changed my life. And I was like, I want to learn to make that sound. And at the time, everybody winning timpani jobs in any orchestra had gone to Cleveland Institute. And so I was like, that's where I want to go to school. And so I went to school there so I could learn that Cleveland sound. And I figured I'll always have the other sound in my hand. I can make that sound if I want to. And I went to Cleveland, and it was a really interesting experience because it was really closed-minded and really cutthroat competitively. It was not a healthy environment, and it was really about like a little bit of showing that you were practicing the most hours, and you practiced more hours than anybody else. And it did not come from the teachers. Like the teachers were Paul Yonchich, who's still there, who's the timpanist in the Cleveland Orchestra, and Richard Weiner, who sadly passed away this past year. But those guys were not about that. I mean, they would tell me, like, "Damien, you don't need to practice so much. You're doing well. Don't worry about it." And Mr. Weiner would always tell me, he'd be like, "Whatever you do, don't lose your swing. You have swing. Don't lose that. I stopped playing drum set. I lost my swing. Don't lose your swing." So they were not about like spending 15 hours a day, but there was so much peer pressure, and everybody in the department was like, if you're awake and not in the practice room, you're wasting your time. And so that I was not like a strong enough person to like resist that. And so that seeped in, and I ended up developing really debilitating hand issues. I mean, when I was there, 3 people had carpal tunnel surgery
Wow.
when I was in school there, and a lot of people had hand issues and back issues, and it kind of broke me a little bit mentally. And so I knew, I was like, all I have to do is win a job. My life is about winning a timpani job. And I like kind of lost track of everything else, even though I had been paying my rent the whole time playing jazz gigs. Like that's how I paid my rent, was playing jazz. And I learned so much. And I was so lucky to play those gigs with those guys. And Cleveland had a great jazz scene. I'm sure they still do, but I mean, it was amazing. I got to see so many great players so close up when I was there. But yeah, I really lost track of things, of like priorities. You know, it became less about being a great musician and learning to be a better artist, and more about being perfect when I was there. And which I think probably all musicians go through a little bit of that. But the being perfect was not. Sometimes that works for people. It did not work for me, and it really shut me down mentally and physically too. And then my senior year, Tim Adams came through, and Tim Adams had gone to school there, and he was timpanist in the Pittsburgh Symphony, which incidentally was my first audition, and I did really well at, and then he ended up winning the job. He's older, about 15 years older, and he came to do a master class, and he said 2 things during that master class that stuck with me really hard. And he said like, you know, I always knew I had to get an orchestra job to support my drum set habit. Like he couched it like a drug thing, but like it made like it, that resonated so strongly with me. And I was like, that's what I need. I need an orchestra job so I can play drums all the time, you know? And so I like became obsessed. I didn't get it in the good way that he meant it. I became obsessed with like, I have to get an orchestra job so I can play drums all the time, which doesn't make any sense. But you know, I was a kid. And the other thing was I was playing Finlandia timpani parts, great timpani part. And I was like worrying so much about like using proper technique, which was a really big Cleveland thing, was like technique. And at one point he stopped me. He goes, Damien, he goes, I don't think you can make a bad sound. Just hit the drum. Stop worrying about it. And that was like so key, because it's like that Malcolm Gladwell thing. Like I had put in my 50,000 hours of technique, and I wasn't going to make an ugly sound unless I wanted to make an ugly sound. And him just giving me permission was huge. And so when I was graduating and I knew I wanted to go to grad school, I was like, I need to study with that guy. But I made a pit stop on the way, and I went to Juilliard first, which was a mistake. And I left Juilliard and went to.
Why is that?
It was really interesting. When I was there, it was like the opposite of Cleveland. Like at Cleveland, you were never good enough, and you never were practicing enough hours. And when I was at Juilliard, there was a real vibe of like, this is Juilliard, you've arrived. Like, and it kind of came from not the percussion faculty, but like, I remember like theory teachers and like just like a general vibe of the place. It was like, this is Juilliard. You've arrived. You've made it. And I was like, I'm not anywhere. I'm a kid and I need to get a job. And I just felt like the people of my peers were great people and great players. And, you know, like Matthew Strauss, who's in Houston Symphony, is amazing. And Pablo Riepi, who just took over at Oberlin College, like really great people. But I wasn't getting enough like challenge from a lot of the peers. And also like, I felt like everything I did, my teachers were like, that sounds great. And I was like, well, it doesn't sound good enough because I'm still in school. So make me better, kind of a thing, you know? And I was just like, you know, had real blinders on, and I was practicing like 15 hours a day. And I like developed a situation where I couldn't open my hand and couldn't move my arm, really over practiced.
Wow.
Yeah. And so Tim came through again, like just like those things that happen with the Pittsburgh Symphony. And he came and listened to me play, and he was like, call this woman and tell her that you're coming to Carnegie Mellon on a full scholarship. Ask her to give me a call. And so like he just like plucked me out of like a real depth, and I still couldn't play. And what Tim did, so freaking grateful. Like he is like old school mentor. So I couldn't play physically yet. So my lessons were like, he'd call me like 7:30 in the morning. He'd be like, yo, D, come pick me up. And I'd be like, what? He'd be like, get dressed and pick me up. And I like would go pick him up at his his house, and we'd drive to the hall, and he'd like work on his drums, and I'd like sit with him and watch him work on the timpani, and then like I'd sit in the hall during rehearsal, and then we'd go to lunch afterwards, and then he'd be like, drop me off at home and go practice, go, and I would drop him off at home and then come back, and then like we'd have rehearsals or whatever, and then he'd be like, okay, come get me after the concert, and I'd pick him up, and we'd like go hear a salsa band. And he'd be like, you see that girl over there? Go say hi to her. You get an F for your lesson this week. And I'd be like, I can't. And I was like super introverted. I was like, I can't talk to her. And he was like, he knew what motivated me. He knew I didn't want to get a bad grade, but I couldn't talk to a girl. So he just was like this like old school, like full body mentor, like heart, soul, mind, hands, everything. And like fixed my head. And then gradually I was allowed to start playing again. I was like seeing a bunch of doctors and stuff. I had focal dystonia. I had to like relearn how to play, and just like he was amazing, and he just like got me back. And through doing that, I started to take auditions again, and I would always get to the finals. And then I just had this like epiphany of like I was in Pittsburgh, and I was playing with like a klezmer band, and then I would play with like the band that you play with, the marching thing, like with just like wearing a snare, and we'd play like the Pittsburgh Pirate Pet Band, like we'd march around the stadium playing, and then I would play like with this pop singer, and then I would play like sub with an orchestra, and I was like, this makes me happy. Like just doing the orchestra stuff, I was so unhappy, and he's like, okay, so then let's do that, like. Which he just like, it was a thing of just like giving permission to be like, it's okay. Cause for me, it was real hard. I felt like I was failing my parents if I didn't get an orchestra job. And then like, it was a real weird thing where they were Jewish parents that didn't push me to be a doctor. They pushed me to be an artist, but it worked out. My sister's an artist too. She's an actress. But like, I felt like I was failing them if I didn't get that. And once like Tim kind of gave me permission, he's like, if that's not what you want to do, then let's do this. And I was like, oh, okay. And so then like my lessons became playing along with Parliament records and Ohio Players records and like going to hear bands and all that kind of stuff. And it was so amazing. And then I, moved to New York. It worked out.
But you were in grad school. You finished grad school in Cleveland?
So Pittsburgh. I went to Carnegie Mellon.
You went to Carnegie Mellon.
So I went Cleveland, Juilliard, and then Carnegie Mellon.
So you went to Juilliard to start out grad school, and you're like, no, this is not working.
Yeah, it just wasn't the place for me. I just wasn't like ready. I wasn't. I wasn't. I was glad I went to school in Cleveland because there were really no distractions there. Mm-hmm. I just practiced and went to hear the Cleveland Orchestra on Saturday nights, and spent time with my friends and my girlfriend. And in New York, there was just like nothing but distractions, and I just wanted to practice, and I was not in a good headspace, and so. Mm-hmm. When Tim came through and Ken gave me that lifeline, I just followed him to Pittsburgh, and it was really it was the best thing that could have happened to me.
So what was your emphasis at Carnegie Mellon? I mean, I don't know much about grad school. I didn't go to grad school, but it was.
I mean, it's the same. I was a performance major there as well. I got a master's in performance music. I was just still studying. I was really a timpani major in both undergrad and grad school. I was a timpani major. I was studying to be really focused on timpani. I could play everything else, but I never got like musical highs playing orchestral percussion. But I got my first musical high I ever experienced was playing timpani for Romeo and Juliet Overture Fantasy Tchaikovsky when I was at Interlochen, my junior year of high school. And I just remember like playing that role at the end and like having like a full like flush over my body and starting to like just have like emotional overload, just playing this huge timpani role surrounded by the sound of this orchestra. And that was like my first musical high. And I was like, oh, wow. And I remember telling my dad about it. And my dad was like, you can be a professional musician. That's a job that you can do. And I was like, oh, wow. Because I also wanted to be like a graphic designer or an English teacher or maybe some sort of a sociologist, anthropologist person. I had a lot of interests, and I was a big nerd and a good student. But then I found this like passion.
So you wound up moving to New York City after grad school.
Yeah.
What year was that?
Summer of 99.
99. And your first job, did you go right into something professionally? Did you have a gig lined up?
No. So my my friend from undergrad and roommate at Juilliard Is this composer named John Mackey, who I'm still really good friends with. I saw him last month when I was in San Francisco. And he had stayed at Juilliard and was living in New York, and he was working at the Lincoln Center archives. And when I was thinking about maybe moving to New York, I came here to. He had written some music, chamber music, for string quartet, clarinet, piano, and drums for the Parsons Dance Company. And he had written all this percussion music with me in mind. And so I came to New York to do this, and we rehearsed for 2 weeks, and played at the Joyce. And while I was here doing that, I reconnected with my friend Tom Kitt, who I had met at Interlochen. We were in the same cabin at Interlochen the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. And he had been trying to get me to move to New York for years. Like, we became real fast friends at Interlochen. Like, the second day or third day we were there, we like found a cabin that had a piano and a drum set, and climbed in through the window and spent our whole summer in that cabin just playing music together. And so while I was here to do that gig with the dance company for John, at nighttime we were rehearsing with Tom and a bass player and guitarist, and rehearsing songs and doing things. And we had been like, he had been like sending me cassette tapes for years of songs he was writing. Like, what do you think about this? And I would like put drum parts to it and send it back, and like doing the stuff. Like, I've been in next to normal. I like have the cassette somewhere in a shoebox from like 1997 when he wrote that song, and mailed it to me, and was like, what do you think about this? What do you think about the bridge? Like, we've been working on these songs for a long time. But so I did this gig, and then I was playing for these dancers. And at the end of that gig, a couple of the dancers were like, do you play dance classes? And I was like, of course I play dance classes. And I had no idea what that meant at all. I didn't even play hand drums at that time. And they were like, oh, great. In a couple of weeks, I'm teaching this workshop. And the other guy was like, oh, I'm teaching a workshop in the afternoon the same week. And they were like, you should do it. And so I was like, absolutely. And I talked to my sister, and I was like, can I come stay with you? Because she was already living here at that point. And I went back to Pittsburgh, and I bought a djembe, and I checked out some videos of the Royal Ballet of New Guinea, which are, all djembefalos, and slow motioned it and figured out how to play djembe. And then came back and started playing for those 2 weeks, played dance classes. And again, we set up to do a gig at Arlene's Grocery, since I was going to be in town with Tom Kitt. So during the day I was playing dance classes. So, I was 25 playing for a bunch of dancers. And then in the evening rehearsing with the band. And then we did a gig, and all the dancers came to the gig, and the dance company that I played for came. And I was like, I'm moving to New York right now. So I was like, but how am I going to do it? So John was like, there's an opening with jazz at Lincoln Center, because they're going to be moving out. He's like, it's hush hush, but they're buying the Coliseum, and they're going to open a new jazz at Lincoln Center complex, and they need to extract their music from the Lincoln Center archives to make their own music library. And so I was like, well, I know about jazz. I had taken aside from playing it, I had taken jazz history at all three schools I went to. I mean, I always loved jazz. And so but I am a total Luddite with technology. So I came up and went to the interview, and I impressed enough with my knowledge of the music that they were like, okay, you can do it. So when I moved here, my job was to be the archivist, to create the library, which was freaking thrilling, because I was holding Duke Ellington's manuscripts in my hand, looking at his notation. It was mind blowing. It's still mind blowing to this day when I think about it. But that was amazing, and that led to it didn't lead to any playing gigs, but at the time, Winton heard me talking to my boss and was like, I need a guy like that's organized to help me with this project I'm doing. So then I ended up having a key to Winton's apartment, and was helping him. It was when he was writing Blood on the Floor with James Oliverio for the first collaboration between the New York Phil and Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. And Oliverio, I didn't know him personally, but he had written my teacher a timpani concerto. So I was like, oh, I've studied your timpani concerto. And he's like, wait, you know about real music and stuff. And so then I ended up writing and helping with the percussion parts for that piece of music, hanging out so it didn't lead to any playing, but it led to some really incredible experiences and exposure. But that was so I had this job working at Lincoln Center, and then working for went and working for James Oliverio, and that was a really cool year where I didn't have a lot of playing, but that was like a really cool transition into New York for me. Was that? Yeah.
Did you still have a goal of becoming a professional timpanist?
I did. No, I had let go. This is slightly dark, but I when I was still at Carnegie Mellon, I had taken the audition for a principal timpani job at the Columbus Symphony, and it had narrowed it down to 3 people, and they decided to each have us back for 3 months to play with the orchestra to see who they liked best. And so I had a great run there. It was really, really great. And one thing that happened was while I was there, I remember my first day in, I had like studied all the scores. We were doing Prokofiev 5 and Marriage of Figaro Overture and stuff. And I had studied all the scores, and I was like, I got there early as they would let me to like work on the timpani and clear the head so everything would be in tune. And I had the score next to me on a stand, and I was all ready to go. And like everybody walked in like 2 minutes before downbeat and like just whipped out their horn and their violin, and then like we were like in the middle of like the second to last bar of the symphony when like the clock ticked and people just put their instruments down like before the last chord, and it was like, it's break, and I was like, come on, what's wrong with you people? And after 3 months, I was like looking at the clock and being like, it's break. And I noticed that, and I was like, I do not want music to be a job. If music is a job, I'm going to go make a lot more money and do something else, and then, but I still wanted it. I wasn't like totally ready to walk away. So anyway, the end of my section came, and the last person did it. And then it was time to like find out who got the thing. And I got this phone call from the personnel director of the orchestra, and he was like, hey, and they called it like 7:30 in the morning on like a Tuesday or something. I was still living in Pittsburgh at the time. And he was like, hi, I just wanted to let you know we really appreciate it. We decided to go in another direction. And I was devastated because all the people in the orchestra to whom I had spoken were like, you got the job. Like everybody loves you. The conductor adores you. You got the job. And I was like packing my stuff up to move to Columbus. And like 2 months later, I got a phone call from the principal percussionist, who's a great guy. And he asked he was like, I'm so sorry what happened. We need an extra for a summer pops concert. Do you want to come play? And I was like, I really don't. What happened? That's such a bad taste in my mouth. And he's like, well, you know what happened, right? And I was like, no. And he said that when they went to vote, there's 12 orchestra members on the panel and the conductor, and 11 of them voted for me, and one person voted for someone else who was a friend he had gone to school with. He was the concertmaster, and apparently everyone was like, well, Damien won the job. This is the story that I was told. And apparently this violinist like lobbied the conductor for a couple of weeks and said I was too green, I was too inexperienced, I wouldn't be able to handle the pressures, and got the conductor to overturn it and hire the other guy. And what the guy told me, was that about a year later, the guy called me again just to see how I was doing. And at that point I had moved to New York, and I was really happy with the decision and everything. But like, I said, that was a real turning point for me, because like, my thing was I don't like schmoozing and I don't like being fake. And so I felt like in order to be successful in almost all the rest of the parts of music, you had to be willing to go out and do the schmooze and tell people how great they are and not be yourself in a rehearsal and all this stuff. And I was like, but classical music is the one meritocracy. You're behind a screen, you audition, blah, blah, blah. And like, when I heard that story, I was just like, it's not a meritocracy. So if it's not a meritocracy, I want to go play drums in New York City. And that's what got me to move. And so I was grateful for it, but I had come around to being like, I don't want to be in that world. I don't want to be in a world that like music is a job. I don't want to be in a world where they look down on you because you play drum set on the side. I don't want to be in a world where, they don't understand that Shostakovich has a pocket and a groove. Like I remember going to hear the Cleveland Orchestra, and they were doing Shostakovich 10, which is like the end of that is a freaking like heavy metal mosh band. It's like amazing. It's like, it's so cool. And I remember like someone behind me going, excuse me, young man, could you please sit still? I'm trying to listen to the music. And I was like, do you know that classical music is based on dance forms? Like, you're supposed to move to this music, you know? And all these little combined things that happened around the same time just said, I was like, you're in the wrong place. And so I had let go of wanting to be a timpanist and just wanted to play all music again. And that, you know, that combined with the dance music gig, that dance performance gig, sent me to New York permanently.
So having a Broadway show is very similar. You know, it's a job, but it's a job that I particularly love. I'm sure you do as well. How do you reconcile the fact that, you know, you said you didn't want you didn't want a job, but now, you know, doing shows, it's kind of like having a job. How do you see it, or make sense out of that?
That's actually a really great question. It's funny. I've been really, really fortunate. You know how it is. As a drummer, you're part of a show from the creation. Like, you're usually there on that first day of the first rehearsal, the very first reading. And so I'm not totally sure what your experience is, but mine has been that I've gotten to create the drum parts for the shows that I've played. With the exception of one show, I've gotten to write all the books for all the shows I've played. And so I feel a sense of like ownership of them. And I also have always left space. Now, this is different from subbing, because subbing is a real different gig, and we talk about that separately. But when I'm playing the show that's my show, I feel like I'm still getting to express myself within the context. I'm not going to say confines, because I don't feel confined, within the context of what it's trying to say and communicate to the audience. You know, so one of the things that I thought was so great, that I loved about classical music, and it wasn't a job for me, was that, like, even though you were playing written timpani parts, like, you know, this is before Googling, I would go to the library and I would get out books on the composer, and I'd get out books on the pieces if there were any, and books and look up like what was happening socially and historically at the time the pieces were written. And I would try to find out as much about the piece as I could, and it would find its way into my version of how I played the music, you know? And I feel like when you play a show, you're part of the storytelling. And if you're just playing your part, then you probably shouldn't be doing that gig, in my opinion. Like, I feel like we are there. It's just like I do when I play with any singer in a band. Like, I am there to support what they're trying to do. And I feel like when I'm playing in a show, my job is to support the storytelling, to support the ambience or the atmosphere or the emotion or whatever that is. Or if it's just like a dance break, then it's to support the dancers or the energy or the buoyancy of the moment. So I never feel like I'm just like playing a part for one thing. And I also always like, you know, and this is something that it varies from pit to pit, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, but like, you know, there are some people that are just there doing a job and showing up and playing their notes. So what you're there for is, for me, it's the interaction between you and the other musicians. You know, it's hard to interact with the cast. You hope that they're listening to you, but you don't really know. But like, you at least can like feel that bass player is listening to you. And when you shift, he's shifting with you a little bit. And when you like, maybe you hear the guitarist like laying into something a little different, you bring that hi-hat up a little different that day. And like, that's thrilling every time for me. Like, I got emotional, but like, I never get tired of that experience. It's so exciting. It's that connection. It's the thing that I miss so much about this whole period, is like, you know, like, was I grateful for the like 6 or 7 like Zoom, you know, home recording records I got to do for people? I was, but it didn't feel like I was playing music. You know, it felt like I was in a room by myself, almost like practicing, learning something, you know, because you were just doing it by yourself. But it's that interaction with the people you're working with that's so exciting. And so every night is different, even if what's on the page is the same. Even if I rarely play the part the same exact way every night, but even if I do, even the parts that I do, you feel it differently every night because you had a different day that day, and you read something that made you happy, or you talked to a relative that made you feel sad, and so you play it differently that night. And so I never feel like I never feel like I'm going to work. And one of the things that I always like say when I like give advice to people that are doing it or doing their first show, if they ask, I don't give it unsolicited, but if they ask, I always say, like, if you don't feel like going to work that night, sub out, because somebody else does feel like it. and you shouldn't be there if you don't want to be there because your heart isn't in it, and someone else needs the money and wants to play. And so I really try to live by that. If I don't feel like playing that night, I make a phone call. So I don't really have that experience of it feeling like a job because I don't let it happen.
What was the first show that you did?
That I subbed, or that was my book?
Well, first show that you subbed, or first show that you did in New York City as a drummer on Broadway or off Broadway?
Well, actually, the very first show I did was a limited run, Mario Cantone's one-man show, Laugh Whore. And this was back when Tom was still a player. He wasn't yet like Tom Kitt in bold print. And the Tom Kitt band was Mario's backup band. We did a lot of backup bands for comedians in the early 2000s.
Wasn't Mike Aarons in that band too?
Mike played, and Dan Grenis was the bass player.
Yes.
Yeah, really
Man, wow.
great bass player. He's based in Vegas now, but I miss him. Such a great player. And Mikey. And so we were the band, and that was the first show that we did. It was really fun. But my first Broadway show was the original Color Purple, which I got.
That's where I met you, I think.
Yeah, that's where we met when you were subbing for Buddy.
Yes.
Yeah. That was my first Broadway show. That was amazing, and that was a show I got because I played dance classes, and I had played for a workshop that Donald Byrd did at Steps, and Donald said, "I just got asked to do a workshop for this possible Broadway show. Would you be?" He's like, "I want to have a drummer." He's like, "I'm just paying you out of my pocket, so it's not gonna be that much, but would you want to come do it?" And I was like, "Of course, whatever. Get a chance to work with Donald Byrd, amazing." And that led to getting that gig ultimately, because when we ended up creating this 18-minute African ballet during that workshop, like 8 or 11 minutes of which stayed in the show, and I had written this like giant African percussion score for it, and so that he ended up saying like I have to bring my percussionist with me to do this, and so I ended up getting the gig with that, which was really, really fortunate.
The first show you did was Color Purple.
Yeah.
Then after Color Purple, what was the next one that came your way?
Hi-Fidelity.
I think I saw that once. I really need to.
You were one of like the 6 people that saw it.
How long did it last?
It was a great show. No, it wasn't. The producers didn't advertise for it. People like in the next theater over didn't know that we were opening. I mean, there was no advertising for it. It was a really, really fun show. It also was a victim of one of the worst reviews ever written by Brantley that had absolutely nothing to do with the show. Like it was like a last straw moment for Brantley in terms of movie adaptations, which of course now is almost every single musical, right? But at that point, it was like a tipping point for Brantley, and it was really just a tirade against musicals based on pre-existing properties, I should say. And the review said almost nothing about our show, but it was scathing at the same time, and it was a really unfortunate thing. But it was really great. And Tom, I still, in my head, the songs that Tom wrote for that show pop in my head all the time because they were so catchy. And Amanda Green's lyrics were so, so funny. Just really great stuff.
So after Hi-Fidelity, what was after that?
Man, chronologically speaking, I think the next thing was maybe the next thing after Hi-Fidelity was off-Broadway show called Great American Trailer Park Musical, which was super
Oh, yeah. I heard about that, too. I was, what's his name?
Guitarist, Dave, that you played.
Dave Matos.
Dave Matos was in that band.
Yes.
Yes,
And Matt, too, right? Wasn't Matt, I gotta.
Hinkley?
No, Matt Gallagher.
No, Matt wasn't on that. Matt was on Hi-Fidelity. Gallagher was on Hi-Fidelity.
Okay, that's probably why I get it confused.
Yeah. Oh, Gallagher, man. He was so awesome.
Dave Matos, man.
Dave Matos. Yeah, that was a crazy fun band, a crazy fun show. And then maybe was the next thing Addams Family, maybe? I'm not sure. That was a great experience. That was great and bad, up and down. Happy, sad, like the show said. There were some great things about it. Getting to work with Andrew Lippa. It was the first show I did with Mary Mitchell, which was amazing because she's just the greatest. And Andrew Andrew's such a great composer and great singer, and like having him in the room was so exciting. It's like having Tom in the room, like just getting to work with these great composers like Tom Kitt and Andrew Lip was so lucky, so great. And Addams Family, and then no, before Addams Family was Next to Normal. Next to Normal was before Addams Family because I left Next to Normal to do Addams Family. Yeah, Next to Normal and that was like my first big hit that I got to play.
What, Next to Normal? Next
to Normal, yeah.
Now, how long did that last, and why did you leave?
So we had done, I had worked on that show for like 10 years because it was Tom's, and I had done like, when you like play like 2 or 3 songs from a show on a concert with other shows, like, I had been doing it since back then. And before we had even done a workshop and a reading, all these things. And then they did a nymph run that I couldn't do, I think, because I was in lock-in for Call Purple or something. And then we did the off-Broadway at Second Stage. And then we did the DC at Arena Stages, where we like totally rewrote the show. I say we, but Tom and Brian totally rewrote the show, and then brought it back, and then opened on Broadway, and it was a big hit. That show was so close to me emotionally, and the show itself was so emotional. I mean, playing that show, you would hear people heaving and sobbing and breaking down in the audience nightly. It was a really powerful piece of art that Brian and Tom created. And it actually, we were on stage, and like I said before, like if I'm not in it, if I'm not supporting and connecting and communicating and playing, then it's not worthwhile to me. But that was a show that I needed to find a way to separate, and I couldn't. And I was going through the emotional ringer every single night, and it was a lot. And after a year, and I got married during it, and just a lot of stuff was happening. And after a year of it, I just needed to step away from it. It was too much to play every night. It was so thrilling because that book, I mean, I've been lucky, like I said, to write all my books, but that book is like really me in a drum book. Like it's all the stuff that I do in terms of feels and pockets and the djembe drum set thing. And like, it just was, I was too close to it. And so when I had this chance to step to this comedy show that I had been working on also for like 5 or 6 years, it felt like the right time to step aside and let someone else sit in the chair, and then I got Shannon, who's so great, and Shannon got to play it. And it was the right move for me to step away and do something else. So that's why I left. It was because the show was so good, basically, that I had to step away.
Then you went to Addams Family.
Went to Addams Family, and that show was really fun, and I got to play another fun hybrid book that I had written, and I really liked. It was sort of like a step on the way to when I would eventually get to SpongeBob, because it was nice to play a show that made people laugh, that like people would come to Next to Normal, and I'd see them afterwards, and they would just look like they'd been crying for an hour, and they would say like, I just need to walk around for a little bit before I can talk. Like they would,
Wow.
they'd be hit, which felt great, but also was like, it was nice to play Addams Family and come out and just be like, that was so much fun. I loved it. Like to just have a different kind of reaction. Like probably, I haven't seen Ain't Too Proud, I will admit, but man, that music, when I started learning your book, like I was like, how can you not just have so much fun every night? This music is so great.
Oh man, it's amazing. I love it. You did If Then after Addams Family.
Yeah.
Tell me about If Then.
Oh, okay.
Show I've never seen. That was with Adam Pascal, right?
Yeah, I mean, that show was, I think that show also got like, was like a victim of its excellence in a way. Like, I mean, it was Tom and Brian and Michael, who had just done, had just done Next to Normal, was their last show, a gigantic hit. It was the first time that Adina and Anthony had been together since Rent. It had so many, it had LaChance, which was like her first big show since Color Purple. It had Jen Colella, it had Jerry Dixon. I mean, it was an embarrassment of riches in this show, and Starobin was orchestrating again. So it was, I think the expectations were so gigantic that there's no way it could have lived. You know, how do you live up to Next to Normal and Rent, like with the addition of Jerry Dixon and LaChance and Jen Colella? You know, it's just crazy. And I think it was for me, it was such a different experience because it was the first time I had done a show with Tom where I hadn't been in the room. So the first time I got to see the show, we were like, was rehearsals for when rehearsals started in Out of Town in DC. And I was like, what's happening? It was so weird to be playing songs that I didn't know when they were already happening. And I didn't know the story and I was trying to play catch up. But you know, the music was great because it was Tom Kitt and the lyrics were super brilliant and funny because they were Brian Yorkie. So the piece was great. I think the trouble with that show was just that they didn't figure out exactly how to tell the story. And also, like, you know, not all audiences are that smart. I mean, you really had to pay attention. You really couldn't passively consume that show. You had to pay attention the whole time. And not everybody wants to think when they go to a musical, you know? I think people go to a play with a different expectation than a musical sometimes. And so I think it suffered from bloated expectations. But I think it was a great piece and the music is great. And anytime I get to play a song from there, I'm always like, oh my gosh, this is such a great song. You know, like, so, you know, it did well. And, you know, I loved what Adina did, but Adina can be polarizing. Some people don't like her voice. Some people do, you know, and it is what it is. So, but I loved that experience. I thought it was great. And I also got to meet some great people like Tamika Lawrence, who then I, you know, formed a band with and played with her for a while. And she's a freaking force of nature. And first time I got to work with Pearl Sun and a whole bunch of great people that I met on that show. That's the fun thing, you know, about doing shows is all the people you meet and then get to work with afterwards. So,
speaking of great people, tell me about the Christian Chenoweth show.
Oh man,
to Broadway.
Well, I mean, Kristen is. I'm a little speechless when it comes to Kristen. I just think that she is like a timeless, classic talent that would have been, you know, Barbra Streisand if she was born then. Like she can sing. She can legitimately. People say that about everybody, but she can legitimately sing anything. She is the only person I've ever met that is nicer than her public persona and more talented than her public persona. Like behind the scenes, she's even more Kristen than she is in front of the scenes. Like she's an amazing boss. She's so much fun to work with. She's an incredible musician and she's just really exciting. And in terms of like kind of living your dream, like playing with her is as close to like being successful, I guess, in quotes, as I have with anything that I've done. Like when I was in Pittsburgh and I was studying with Tim, Tony Bennett came through and they were playing with the orchestra and he brought, you know, his own trio with him. He brought piano, bass, and drums like you've done, you know, like plenty of times. And so like Clayton Cameron was playing drums and, you know, after, you know, Tim was, I heard about it and I was like, oh my gosh, Clayton's playing with you guys this week. And he goes, yeah, you want to come to rehearsal? And I was like, of course. And so, you know, Tim is awesome. He like brought me to rehearsal and I got to sit and watch Clayton warm up and do the rehearsal with the orchestra. And he goes, you want to get lunch with him? And I was like, you can't just talk to someone like Clayton Cameron, you know, like, you know how it is when you're on the other side, you don't think about that, right? And like, you can't just do that. And he's just a musician like anyone else. He's in a town where he probably doesn't know anybody. He probably doesn't have anything to do. And so I was like with Tim and we walked up and he's like, this is my student Damien. And I get to meet him. And he's like, do you want to have lunch? And he was like, sure. So we like went and had lunch and then we're having lunch. And then he's like telling us about this new book he's working on. This is before his Brushes book came out. And he's like, do you want to check it out? He's like, I'd love to see what you guys think about some of the notation I'm using. And like, we went back to his hotel room and like, he showed us the stuff on like one of those, you know, those Ed Thigpen brush pads. And he like had like, you know, like the handwritten stuff on the pictures and he was flipping the pages. And I was like, just sitting there like, you know, just like a little kid, like watching a movie of himself being like, this is the life, man. You play with this person, and you go and you play with orchestras, and you're in different towns every day. And I was like, this is my dream. And that's what I get to do with Kristen. Like on Friday night, we're flying to Utah, and we're playing with the Utah Symphony, and we have rehearsal in the morning with the orchestra, and then we have the concert in the evening, and then I'll fly back on Sunday. But those gigs with Kristen are everything, because it's like, you know, I'm not playing in orchestras anymore. I'm not a timpanist, but I still get to play with orchestras all the time. And I get to do it from my place of confidence and comfort. And, you know, when you're a timpanist, you're driving the orchestra. You're the drummer of the orchestra. But when you're actually the drummer in the orchestra, you're really the drummer in the orchestra. And so, like, you know, we played with the freaking Chicago Symphony and the Philadelphia Orchestra. And, like, and I'm in the front playing this amazing rep with the best singer in the world, and getting to play with these orchestras that I always dreamt of playing with. And for me, it's the absolute, I get so emotional talking about it, but like every single time I pinch myself and say, how lucky I am, because it's so great. And I'm using my technique and my chops to play cleanly and with dynamics, but I'm also thinking like a drummer, and I'm driving a full orchestra and a string section. And every time, without fail, you know, our amazing production manager, Matt, you know, he sets things up in the morning. So I get there for the orchestra rehearsal, and the string players are coming in, and I'm sitting in front of / in between, depending upon the size of the orchestra, the cellos and the violas. And so immediately you just get all these looks and people putting in earplugs while they stare at you and all this stuff, you know what I mean? You know, the usual thing. And then by the first orchestra break, everyone's taking the earplugs out, and everyone's smiling, and everyone's coming over and being like, you're such a dynamic drummer. You know, it's so great. We're really listening to you, you know, all this stuff. And it's fun. Like, I don't resent having to prove myself over and over again. I think it's fun because I love to buck the stereotype. But like that gig with Kristen is the best thing I get to do, because we get to, it's either playing with an orchestra, which is, for me, those gigs are my favorite. And a very close second is when we travel with the 5-piece band, which is Mary Mitchell, and then Brian Ham on bass, Eric Davis on guitar, and Justin Smith on violin.
Brian Ham.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him since Rent. I think we subbed Rent together years ago. Great player, man.
Great player and great guys. And like, it's just like, it's the dream, you know, like you're just going around, and the music making is at just the highest level. And you can't not be at your highest game, because it's Kristen and she sounds perfect every time, you know? And she's so loose. You would never know it, but like, she's so loose in terms of like, she'll just be like, I don't want to sing that tonight. Let's just do this. And some places she's like, what about this song? A song we've never done. And we'll just throw it together, sound check, you know? And, you know, if she's in the mood to sing, or if her voice is bothering, well, you would never know when her voice is bothering her by listening. But if her voice is bothering her, for her, you know, she'll pick all different songs to sing than what we normally do. And you just got to be ready to do it. And everyone's in it together, and you're always listening. And she never does anything the same way twice. So like, every breath, every pullback, you have to be listening and present. And there's nothing more fun than that challenge of like having, you know, I mean, you know it because you do the same thing of having to listen and be present. And so that, of all my gigs I do, is far and away my favorite. I'm just so fortunate to get to play with her. So,
well, yeah. One of my favorite gigs I've done over the past 5 or 6 years was subbing for you at SpongeBob SquarePants. My God, that show was so much fun. Not only was the show fun, it looked great from the audience, because you know, one thing a lot of drummers on Broadway don't do, or musicians in general, they never see their shows. Why? Because they don't want to know what's going on outside of the audience. So like, I'm playing all this stuff and I can't hear it. And you go, oh man, I don't want to do this anymore. But fortunately for us, we can hear everything that we do because we're the drummers. But man, that show was so much fun, and was so much fun subbing for you. And of course, me having to go back to my technique in junior high and learn how to play traditional again.
You could have flattened the drum out, man. You could have flattened the drum out.
No way. I wasn't going to know. That thing was like 90-degree angle. I was not. No, but it was a lot of fun. Just the challenge of that too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on that show was very challenging. Not only the electric, the pad that you had, and then having to do things with your you know, it was a challenge for me, but it was a lot of fun because the music was fun. But tell me how you got involved in that show.
Oh man, that was another show that I got real lucky with. so I had pretty much worked on every show Tom had ever done. Um, the other one he had done was the cheerleading show, Bring It On. But I got to do the pre-production workshops for that. I just didn't do it because that was a tour and not a Broadway show, and I didn't want to do a tour. So I'd worked on everything Tom had ever done, and then he was brought in, excuse me, after the show had already been workshopped and stuff, Tom was brought in to SpongeBob to orchestrate it, and he told me he was working on the show, and I was so jealous because, like, I mean, you know, Tom and I met when we were kids, and we're really close friends, and I feel really fortunate for that personal and professional relationship. But then when I didn't get to work on that show, I was like heartbroken because I was like, oh no, and I didn't have a gig at the time, so also financially, but it just sounded like fun. And there was this guy that was working on the show that was a Foley artist, and so he was doing kind of what I had done on my shows, which was like he was playing drums and he was also doing all the other stuff. And Tom said, like, you know, they had done a few workshops and stuff, and he said down the line it's very likely that I'm going to want to split that book up because, you know, the Foley artist can't really play all the drum grooves all the time if he's doing the Foley. And he's like, would you be interested? And I was like, of course, I'll be interested in doing anything you're doing. And so it eventually got to that point where it was slated for Broadway, and then Tom said, listen, we need to break this book up. And you know, I've been really the only other show I worked with. Well, I was ridiculously lucky. My first show working with someone else in the percussion section was with Buddy, where I was just like a nightly lesson on pocket, which has hugely influenced me to this day. I have to share really fast. The best thing Buddy taught me. I'm sorry, I'm so tangential, but I remember this is a visual thing. So my buddy said, he said someone told him this on one of his first gigs at like an early recording session. He said, you show up, you shut up, and you play the music, and this one is the hardest. Which was like one of the funniest things but it's so true. But anyway, so Buddy, I got to work with Buddy, and then I got to work with Billy Miller on Addams Family. Billy played percussion, which was a dream. And then, so I'm coming into this new situation where I'm going to have to work with a percussionist. And Tom had said, think of some percussion stuff he could do for tunes when he's not playing drums, when he's not playing Foley stuff. He's like, because I want to utilize him. I don't want him just to be there for the Foley stuff. And I was like, okay, but I don't know what this guy can do. I didn't know. We met, and like the very first rehearsal, it was just like instant chemistry. And Mike Dobson is such an amazing percussionist, and he was so brilliant at all the Foley stuff he did. I mean, you got to play with him. His pocket is fantastic. Like he's so much, because he thinks like a drummer. So when he's playing percussion, he's putting it where you would put it, and like, anyway, so Tom brought me in, and my first time getting to do anything with it was at the first rehearsal in Chicago. And it was a really weird situation where the drums, because the Foley artist had to be on stage because he had to see the action, because he had to catch everything live. So he was where maybe the drums might have gone, but he was visible on stage, and the pit was whatever size the pit was. And so I was in like a second sub basement in a room by myself in Chicago. And I had never seen the show. I had never heard the music. And so like we had like these, headphones, and we're talking to each other, me and Mike Dobson, and then the great music director, Julie McBride was music directing, and Marco Piguet was playing keys. And so the four of us were just talking. And so like I'd be about to start the first song, and I'd be like, all right, Mike, so what's the feel on this tune, And then he would tell me, and Marco would play a little bit of the groove on piano with it muted in the house, and then we'd like start the first tune. And Tom, had written out drum charts, but it was, it was a situation where he's like, I wrote out kind of like the parts that were on the demos that were given. He basically transcribed the demos that he got, which were mostly programmed drums. And he's like, so when you hear it, you'll know what to do with it, kind of a thing. But I didn't get to hear it till we were like in rehearsals on stage, like in tech rehearsals. It was really crazy. So it was a different kind of challenge, and Mike Dobson like talked me through the vibes, and then like he'd be like, "This is what I did, but you might want to do some blah blah blah." And then like in between, I would like run out of my sub basement up one level to where Tom was like orchestrating, and I'd be like, "Can you play me the demo for this section?" And then he'd play it, and then I run back down, So it was really fun, but it's itself a different way of putting the show together. But I had Tom, and I had the demos, and I had Dobson to guide me, and Dobson was just so great. All the Foley stuff he did was so cool, and that music was so much fun.
Oh my God, almost every song was so much fun to play, and
yep,
good times.
Yeah, man, you killed that show. Everybody loved when they'd be like, "You're out. Who's coming in?" And oh, awesome.
Oh man.
I mean, they liked everybody. I shouldn't say it like that, but everyone obviously loved playing with you. So,
well, I appreciate the opportunity, and it was a. I still just think back to those songs in that era, and thank you for having me. But
oh man, I'm sorry, man. I loved your playing. I saw you play Memphis, and I remember playing with you at Color Purple, and that was like so great. But then getting to just sit back and watch you play at Memphis and just listen. That's why I said like I feel like you got this bounce that is just so joyful. And I was like, oh, I remember when I asked you, I was like, don't play it too much better than me, because I want them to still want me to come back.
I remember you saying that too. That's funny. No, I can't play that show better than you. But the show that you were doing recently, and you're going back to, Jagged Little Pill. Mm-hmm. That music from the time that we were younger, and I'm sure you listened to that album a lot. Did you take a lot of the same grooves from the album and transfer it to the Broadway show? And because I haven't seen the show, so I don't know too much about it, but tell me how different.
You would love to play this show, man. You'd have so much fun. Yeah, this is cool. This was a unique situation because even though SpongeBob was a bunch of pop tunes, they weren't new tunes. I mean, they were new tunes, so like you didn't have to reference anything in terms of what you were creating. But this was obviously, I mean, dang, this record, this record it loomed huge for me. I was in college when I heard this record, and then grad school, and depending upon where I was in a relationship, like each different song was my favorite song at the time, and it was just like so huge in the zeitgeist. When Tom told me like a year before the first workshop, he's like, I have a meeting with Alanis Morissette about adapting. So this good friend of his had the idea, and then like approached Alanis people, and eventually she agreed to take a meeting, and took a meeting with him, and it worked out. So then like Tom was going to get to meet her, and I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, it was kind of the thrill we had when we started working on American Idiot, which I also worked on, and I ended up not doing because the out of town conflicted with Next to Normal and my wedding, so I wasn't able to do that show. But I had done those drum parts and everything, and that was really exciting, getting to meet that band. But then so this was like getting to meet Alanis. Tom was getting to meet her. I wasn't getting to meet her. And he's like, we'll probably do a workshop, and maybe like if it goes well, like next year or something, would you want to do it? And I was like, that's the most ridiculous question you've ever asked me. Like, of course. So then when it was like finally going to happen, I was like, okay, I gotta study this record. And it was really interesting because if you listen to it now, I mean, the story of that record is that a lot of the demos made it onto the record. And so, she and Glenn Ballard had like programmed drums and like recorded live guitars and vocals over like bass and drum loops and things. And, Flea ended up coming in and playing some of the bass and different people, but, they a lot of the stuff is loops. And then they had, Glenn Ballard had done a session with this guy, Matt Log or Loff, I'm not sure how his name's pronounced. But so like the live drums is this guy that just got lucky and got to do the session when he was like in his 20s, got called in to do a session for this unknown Canadian artist, And so when I went to listen to the album, I was like, okay, it was like, this is a good opportunity to sort of do my little thing, which is like that idea of like combining the percussionist and the drummer at the same time, only instead of a percussionist, I'm combining like loops and drums at the same time. And Tom had asked me if like should I program the loops? And I was like, no, I don't want any. I want everything to be live. I want to recreate the loops, and then once I figure out how to recreate the loop, play the drum part on top of it. So that was sort of my thinking as a starting point, was like, figure out how to recreate the loop that sounds a little more organic and earthbound and grounded, and then put like a nice, simple, clean rock drum part on top of that. So that was my starting point. So I knew I had to have my djembe and I knew I had to have my drums. And once again, Tom just let me do my thing. And if there was something that he wanted specifically, I mean, it was usually more along the lines of like, can you not go to the cymbal yet? Or, can you wait to drop the backbeat in until this part, because he's also thinking about the story they're trying to tell, which is, different than just the song on her record. So it was absolutely thrilling, getting to try to honor the original record. And then the other thing that I did was I went and watched as many videos as I could of the way she did the tunes live, which was then different because, the way that like Taylor Hawkins played them was different than the record, which is really different than the way that Gary Novak played them. And then, Matt Chamberlain also did some of her stuff. She's had the most amazing drummers. And so I just sort of like watched the way everyone approached them and thought about the record, and then thought about like, how is this context different? Like what are Brooke, the book writer, what are Brooke and Tom trying to tell in the story here? And what's too much, what gets in the way of the storytelling, what supports it in the right way? And how can I maybe even in this context, like kick it up a notch from where the record was? Because that's the thing about the record is like, they're great, but because a lot of them are loops, they kind of all stay here. And so in a show, you want it to have some sort of an arc, so that was my approach was how can I put the loops and a drum part together, infuse it with some of how she does it live, and then tell the story that we're telling. So it was really awesome. And then there's like the one iconic drum fill in You Ought to Know that Tom wouldn't let me play on the record, that I play live in the show. Tom wanted this like bump 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 instead of the clack 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 da-da-ka-dum. Tom wanted this pump, and Tom is always the boss. So I did that for the record. But then in the show, I was like, if I don't play this dude, I'll have every drummer in the world saying, what's wrong? And he let me play in the show, thankfully. So it's really fun.
So for those people who want to become musicians in the Broadway pit, especially drummers that are listening to this and watching this, what's some advice that you would like to give them? Like, what's the most important thing that someone should know about being a successful drummer on a Broadway show?
I mean, I think what served me the most was that I genuinely listened to all different types of music, not different shows, but different types of music, because I think that you can make I don't want to say a mistake, but it's like you're just skimming the surface if like you're going to play a show that has Latin influence, let's say, and you just learn the Latin drum parts to that show. Like, like what Andres does in the Heights is he's not playing a show. He knows how to play all those types of music. And then he put those feels and those ideas into the square box that is Broadway, but he didn't like learn to play Latin Broadway parts, and so, like for me, Rent is a great show steeped in 80s pop, but it's not 80s rock. It's still a Broadway show that is influenced by the rock genre, but it's not rock. Like if you want to learn to play Rent, listen to 80s rock that would have influenced the composer, and then go play those drum parts with that in the back of your mind, and that in your pelvis, and that in your chest when you play those parts. And I think that's incredibly true for anything that's jazz based, especially. Like Broadway swing is not swing music. So if you can go back and play along with, Count Basie and find that pocket, and then when you play an early Broadway swing, you understand where that type of swing is coming from, So I think the biggest thing is don't study Broadway music, study music. And then when you're playing a show that is a specific genre, listen to music that influenced that genre and go back as far as you can. Like when I was in Absolute Ensemble, we got to play, with Marcel Khalife, who is like the Bob Dylan of Lebanon. He's like a national icon, folk singer, musician, composer. And so I was like, okay, we're playing with Marcel Khalife. Let me get his records. And I listened to it, and it had all this like, darbuka flavor and the drum set. And I was like, well, let me go back a step. And then I like tried to listen to some like folk singers, Lebanese folk singers. And then I was like, okay, and I went back into the earliest stuff I could find of that, which is just like this female singer, like field recordings of like a female singer and somebody playing a single rick, recorded in like the mountains of Lebanon in the 1915 or something like that. So you understand where it comes from. And then when you get up to today's point, because they've also listened to rock music and all the stuff you grew up listening to, you understand where the kernel came from. So for me, that's my biggest thing, I think. And I still do that now, like I did for Jagged Little Pill. I didn't just like listen to the record and learn that record. I was like, let me find every live performance I can find. Let me figure out what these loops are doing. Let me think about the style of those, and then you put it together and then you make your own choice. But it's a more informed choice, so you're coming from somewhere. And when I need a refresher, I definitely don't listen to like my recording of the thing. I'm going to listen to like Gary Novak or Taylor Hawkins playing it live to remember where the like impetus came from that made a stadium full of people scream,
That was one of the more important things that I got from subbing at SpongeBob, is that all of those songs had a different feel and they come from different genres. You had the gospel thing, you had the modern pop thing, you had Aerosmith. And if you know how to play those styles, it becomes easier to fit in when you're required to play, that open hi-hat on, what's that song, the Aerosmith song?
I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about. the Electric Skates tune.
Yes. So it becomes, you come from a more authentic place.
Yeah,
and
totally.
A lot of people that either want to sub for me or, have tried to sub, and then when I hear them play, I can instantly tell that they're not really coming from the place of knowing the music. They have learned all the shows, but they don't really know where it comes from. And I think what you just said is very, very, very important. A couple other things about being a Broadway musician, or a musician that does Broadway shows. What are things that drummers should never do in a Broadway pit?
Well, one of them is, it goes off that Buddy quote. This lesson took me quite a while to learn. I will be honest. It was something that I had trouble with, and I had to have two close friends that are much more important than me. Like, I don't want to say sit me down, but kind of sit me down and tell me this, which is that nobody cares what you think. That's a really big one. And part of it was because my first real Broadway show, Color Purple, I was hired specifically because like Don Bird wanted to know what I was thinking and what I wanted to play. And then my second show was Next to Normal, which I had like helped create. And so I thought that my opinion and ideas were welcome. And, like if you're talking just like the bass player, it might be, but don't talk beyond your peers, because you're not there. You may, we all know this as musicians, because musicians have a sense of, we have a sense of rhythm and timing, and we can feel right away in a reading when a scene doesn't make sense because it's not sitting in the flow correctly, or, the style of song, or even just a single line just is like making a hiccup in the flow of a scene. We can feel it right away, and we can probably fix that. And stage crew, maybe even equally so. Stage crew can always tell like that song doesn't belong on the show. Like they always know, which is the dud. But nobody cares what we think because we're not the creative team. And it's really hard to learn. Like I don't want to say it like this, but it is a little bit of like, you have to learn your place, and our place is, do your job and do a good job. Doing that, I think that's one of the biggest things, and that's a lesson that took me the longest to learn. I was never saying anything bad, but I was expressing my opinions alongside of the creative team, and then I had to be told, like, everybody loves your playing and everyone loves you, but you can't tell people what you think about stuff. And I was like, it was hard. I felt like, I was 5. I felt embarrassed and stupid, and then I was going to get fired. But it's just part of the scene, and that's the truth. And I think that's important also. Like, that's why we all have side projects, like, so that we have a place where your opinion is what matters. That's why I have a band with Lauren Patton, and we have a gig in a couple of weeks, and we have a text chain this morning where we're all deciding, what are we going to play? No, I don't think so. This is why. What about this? So that you can have a place where your creative input is valued. And I know that my musical creative input is valued on the shows that I get to work on, but beyond that, it's a hard lesson, but you can't have an opinion. You can have it, you just can't express it. I think that one. And the other thing is to just respect the MD, even if you don't agree with them, to respect them and do what is asked. And if you don't want to, then take yourself out of the situation and go to another show or do something else.
It's kind of a segue, but what are things that drummers should always do in a Broadway pit? Speaking of the MD,
follow the MD always. Be super. If you're subbing, just be more prepared than you ever think you possibly need to be. You should be. I mean, I remember my first show that I subbed on Broadway was Aida, and that's still probably to this day my favorite show I've ever played. Gary Seligson just wrote the coolest freaking book for that show, and played the piss out of it, and that pit was so awesome. But I remember playing my first show, and the music director coming down afterwards and being like, "Can you just tell me how you prepared for this? Because it just seemed like you knew the show." And I was like, "Just practice it every day for 2 weeks." Like, it just seemed like such an obvious answer, but it was like, I had 2 weeks to learn the show. It was a situation where some of his subs got fired, and I had watched the show like 2 years earlier, and he was like, "Do you still want to learn this book?" And I was like, "Sure." And I had 2 weeks to learn it. So I just practiced every day, and that's what I practiced, and I came in and learned it. So I was just like, being hyper prepared is a big thing. And I think this goes along with what I was saying about, like, when you asked about how do you not have it be a job, but like, just always remember that, like, for at least one person, but probably several hundred, this is the first Broadway show they've ever seen. And so every show should be your first show. Like, you should play it with as much care and attention to detail and mental presence as you do after you've done it 100 times, if you're lucky to do it 100 times. I think that's really huge, to just, like, if you don't want to be there, don't take the gig, but always show up, like, knowing it's someone's first show, or it's someone's anniversary, or somebody saved up for months to be able to afford to buy this ticket, and just play the show with the most respect you possibly can for the material, because that's what it's really about. You're just a hired hand. You're just there to communicate the larger vision of the show. And Tim, my teacher again, Tim Adams, he said something to me once about, like, he said, "We're just hired help." He goes, "When you play a gig, where do you enter? Through the kitchen door. It's like, it doesn't matter that you're up on the stage, but you enter through that kitchen door, you're hired help." He's like, even for me, he's like, "I'm up here on stage, but I have to wear this tuxedo because I'm hired help, and this is what the patrons that pay the bulk of our salaries want to see us wear, is this tuxedo. So I'm hired help. No matter what you are, you're hired help." And I think that just keeps me humble. Like, I never ever, not that I would ever possibly think I'm great, but that, I think that always helps. Anytime that I'm like, "Oh, this gig is beneath me," or playing the show again, or whatever, it's like somebody's first show. If there's 5 people in the crowd, man, they wanted to be there, and you play that show for them. So just like to treat every gig as to be thankful for it. And I felt this way before COVID, but even more now. It's like a real awareness of that sort of, like, just appreciation and gratefulness, without being in any way like hokey or hashtaggy. Like, it's a sincere sentiment. Like I really am someone that's always grateful every time I get to play. So,
What kind of drum gear do you use, and why do you use it? And do you have any endorsements?
that's a cool question. I pretty much mostly just play vintage drums. I just love the old, warm, resonant, punchy sounds of old drums. So I mostly play vintage Gretsch drums in terms of bass drums and toms. They're all vintage Gretsch. The kit that I use those vintage drums for next to normal, but otherwise I always use this really great Ames kit, which I guess is technically vintage now since it's the 80s, but it's not. I'm talking like when I say vintage, like 50s, 60s. This great Ames kit that sounds really warm. And I like smaller drum sizes. I like to use smaller drums that have die-cast hoops that I can tune down, so they have like a punch, but also a lot of resonance. So that way you don't have to hit them hard. And I'm sure that it comes from my 8 years practicing timpani every day, but it's just about getting the most tone that I can out of the drum without having to hit hard. I think a lot. I mean, you can weigh in on this, but one of the most common comments I get every time a sub watches my book to learn is like, "Wow, you really don't hit very hard. Like, you don't play very loudly, but it sounds like I am because I'm getting a big sound." So I'm 100% about tone and sound. So I want my drums to sound good. So I play vintage Gretsch drums or these Ames. My rider for all my gigs are Yamaha Absolute Custom Maple Custom Absolute. They're my absolute favorite non-vintage drum.
That's what I'm using at Ain't Too Proud. My God, those are beautiful drums.
Right. No matter where I am, no matter what kit I get, I can always make them sound good in 5 minutes with just a little tweaking of the heads. They always sound good in 5 minutes. I would love more than anything to have a Yamaha endorsement. Not because I want another set of drums, but just so that whenever I go somewhere to make sure I get those drums. But I love those drums so much. Those are my favorite non-vintage drums. And then my snares are all, I'm a vintage snare geek, and I just have way too many drums back like from like a 1920s leady, to all different flavored chrome brass. I mostly like Snare-Lind and Ludwig's, but I have a few Gretsch and leadies thrown in there. So yeah.
That snare drum at SpongeBob was a Noble and Cooley, right?
That was a Noble and Cooley. Beautiful. Yeah, that was my my high school graduation present that I got. Yeah, I got that drum. That's a gorgeous, versatile drum. I use that a lot. And then I play. I probably technically still do have a percussion endorsement through Toka. I just haven't wanted or needed any new percussion gear in so long. But I got all my stuff through Toka a lot of years ago when I was playing in Barry Manilow's band and I was his percussionist for a little while. I got that endorsement, and their stuff is great. I love it. When I use congas in my setups, I use my Toka congas always. And then I had a Zildjian deal. I don't think I have that one anymore. For me, I just didn't keep that up because I found that I could never play just one cymbal brand, and that's just me. It's just my ear, but I just really love a whole different wash of colors. So like on my kit at Jagged, I've got Zildjian, Paiste, Sabian, and Istanbul. So I've got lots of different things. I just like different colors, so I mix and match until it sounds like the palette that I want.
That's great. I never even thought about using multiple companies.
Yeah, I just find like for me, nobody does a ride better than Zildjian. Like all my old rides just sound so great, and even the newer Ks and Constantinople's like sound great. But then for a splash, like Sabian and Istanbul splashes are they have so much character. So like I go with those for splashes, and then I like some really old Zildjian hats that I have. But then crashes, like Paiste crashes are so cool, and they have all these different lines, and it's fun when I mix a Paiste with a Sabian crash. They have such different like overtone profiles that when you play them together, you actually, sometimes when you play crash crash, they just kind of it becomes a wash, and I like to hear the entrance of each instrument. Like if I'm hitting this crash and then that crash, it's because I want another, I'm making another comment. I don't just want wash wash. So I like to be able to mix and match them so that you hear each voice.
What are some of the projects that you're working on at the moment, and do you have anything that you'd like to promote?
Well, we're still a little shut down, so I don't have a lot of projects. But the thing that I'm doing right now, like the thing that's like my project, is Lauren Patton Band, and that's with Eric Davis on guitar and Mark Schmid on bass and Lauren Patton singing. Lauren is the incredible singer and actress that does You Ought to Know at Jagged Little Pill. And if you haven't seen that, she gets a literal standing ovation in the middle of Act 2 every single night. I've never had ever experienced a standing ovation during a show before, but she gets one every single show. It's astonishing. So she has a crazy voice and is an amazing actress. And so we're doing that, and we're playing. Oh, actually, I don't know if this will come out before then, but we're playing at Rockwood on July 19th and 20th. And if it doesn't come out before then, check your local listings. We'll be playing again sometime. But that's a really, really great, really fun band. And what else? I was doing a few workshops before COVID, and hopefully they'll come back. But never to talk about a workshop, because, as my friend Randy Landau says, like, I'll believe that gig. I don't believe a gig is happening until my first paycheck clears.
That's how I feel. I'm like, yeah, there's Broadway's reopening. I'll think, okay, that's what they say.
Yeah.
I'll be very happy when I'm sitting behind the drum kit and there are people in the audience and those checks start rolling in again. It's going to be a wonderful feeling.
That's literally what I say. Exactly what I say. One thing you were talking about, one in the email you sent, you said, you asked what my favorite show to play was, but I have to say my favorite show that I would like to play that I've never got to play is Hedwig. When that show came back to Broadway, I was like, I want to play that show. How can I play that show? But they came back with the band all intact. But man, I remember hearing that score and being like, it's like if T-Rex and David Bowie wrote a musical together. Like, it's so cool. So that's my favorite show I've never got to play. I'll say that.
Interesting.
What would be yours? What favorite show have you never got to play that you'd want to play?
Oh man, I that's a good question. Yeah, I think I've played all the shows that I've wanted to play. Subbing at Rent, I was just like, I said to myself, it was like 2008, right before it closed. I was like, man, if I can get my own show where I'm on stage playing like rock music and music that I love, I'd be in heaven. And then about a year and a half later, I started on Memphis. I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. I can't believe I'm doing this for a living. I'm playing music that I love. And like what happened with you, you got to create a lot of the parts. Even though with David O'Brien, he was like, just do bing, ka, ging, ging, ka, play it like Tico would do it. And I'm like, again, knowing the fact that I know who Tico Torres was and knowing Bon Jovi music, he just wants meat and potatoes. So I got to play a lot of meat and potatoes. And then I threw my own little thing in from, here and there with some of the other gospel or funk type of grooves.
Yeah.
But that was by far my favorite show to play. But, talking to different people on this podcast, and I was just talking to Bill Lanham, who did Evita, and playing the song And the Money Kept Rolling In. That was so much fun to play because it was in 7, and it reminded me of the breakdown in Tom Sawyer. So I used that reference. I was like, man, if I can play that, then I can play this. But yeah, it's funny. That's a good question. I don't know if there's one show that I haven't played that I'd like to play. I'd have to think about that. Maybe I'll come see yours. And man, I wish.
Yeah. Oh man, you would have so much fun playing that show. I wish that Phil Collins got to write Tarzan, and the music was great. But I wanted an early Genesis musical, because that is some cool mixed meter, funky drum and stuff.
It's a kind of an interesting question. I used to come up with these ideas, but I don't want to do it anymore because I'm coming up with all these ideas, and one day it's going to be an actual thing. Just joking about, yeah, man, I wish there was a P-Funk musical because, I don't know what happened to the Mothership Connection, and I think it was supposed to be, but, George Clinton's legal things were always a nightmare, but, that would be a wonderful thing. But I was, what about a Rush musical? Moving Pictures, the musical.
Oh,
But then I
man.
got to stop talking like that because one day, because we have Tina, we have Jagged Little Pill, we have American Idiot. All these bands from classic, rock or pop artists now have their own musicals.
Sting, Last Ship.
What's that? Yeah,
Sting.
Sting, exactly. You know, and now I hear Brian Adams has something and Don McLean, and I'm like, so anyway, I would, I couldn't play a Rush musical, but everybody's like, you know what, you know who you need to have on that? Joe Bergamini.
Oh yeah, because he was his man. He was his
Yeah,
drum tech. Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, I wouldn't mind a funk musical.
That'd be pretty sweet. I'll step in for the Yes musical because
Now we're
Bill,
talking.
Bill Bruford is my other. Bill Bruford and Stuart Copeland are my other gigantic influences, and those guys, I'll step in for their musicals.
Fragile the musical.
Fragile the musical, yes.
Close to the Edge,
Oh,
or Synchronicity the musical.
Synchronicity, yeah,
Music
that's a
of the
little more
Stage.
straight ahead, but I can take that as long as we throw in some of their early stuff.
Like next to you. What's the first song on the first album?
To you.
Yes. Oh my god.
Oh, all that stuff. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
funny that song and stuff from that era. I did some recording with Anya Singleton, and there's a
Hmm.
song called man, my memory is terrible, man. It's 12:15 p.m. and my memory shot. I need some more caffeine. But there's a song that I played on that I kind of channeled Stuart Copeland because it was that kind of groove. But anyway, I
Yeah,
digress.
there's a lot of Stuart Copeland in my drum parts for sure.
I heard that Taylor Hawkins was a big Stuart Copeland fan, or is a big Stuart Copeland fan, and a lot of stuff that he played on a lot of the Foo Fighters stuff. He said, "Yeah, I got that from Stuart Copeland playing, on the bell, the cymbal." And I was like, "Nah, I listen to it and I hear it."
Yeah.
It's always interesting to hear people's influences. That's why I'm glad I talked to you. Now I understand you much better than I used to.
It's all
So,
about that, though. It's the fun. It's the fun though. It's like when actors do roles, they do good ones. They do so much research, and they ride in a cop car, or they go to the office, or they read papers and books that they care. It's like musicians just like get the music and then learn the notes. But it's like there's so much more, and I feel like that's something that my classical training really did for me. Is I brought over the respect for the material and the element of a thorough study I bring to whatever genre of music I'm playing. And I think that it helps make it more interesting for me. And and I think that it communicates more to people that are listening. I feel like it does. I mean, something does.
I always like to find out what the origins of things are. Like for instance, you think about somebody like Taylor Hawkins. It's like, well, who was he listening to? He was listening to somebody like Stuart Copeland. And it's like, who was Stuart Copeland listening to? When you hear like people like Neil Peart
Mm-hmm.
and people he liked, God damn my memory, the drummer for the Who, Keith Moon,
Moon
and then you see where he got his sound. Then
makes all sense.
and then who did Keith Moon and John Bonham like? They like the jazz drummers.
Yep.
And then those drummers, who did they listen to? You can go back to Joe Jones, and you can go back
Yep.
to Kenny Clark. Then you go back,
Zooty
before
Singleton.
that.
You got Zooty back at the beginning,
Yes.
and
So
Dot.
it's so interesting, and I think a lot of people would be better off doing some more homework and doing some more research because everything just didn't start yesterday.
That's right.
And there's so much more to learn, and just these conversations I enjoy having because I get to learn more about people, and I get to learn. I spoke to somebody else a couple of days ago about classical percussion, and I didn't realize the timpanist is like the main person in the, I guess, the drums. It's not the drum section, percussion section of the orchestra, correct?
Well, there's the
It's like the
orchestra has
principal.
there's percussion. There's a percussion section, and separate from that is the timpanist. And in the percussion section, you usually have a principal, and then an assistant principal, and then one or two section players, depending upon the size of the orchestra and what their budget is. And the assistant principal percussionist is also usually the assistant principal timpanist. But the principal timpanist is very frequently the second highest paid person in the orchestra after the concertmaster. because the timpanist is the tonal and the rhythmic center of the orchestra. Where the timpanist puts the note in relationship to the conductor's baton is basically the pocket of that orchestra, if you think about it. And everyone, if it's an orchestra that listens, I mean, obviously the timpanist isn't ignoring everyone else, but like it's about like, I mean, when I was a timpanist, like I would be thinking like, am I playing with brass right now? I should breathe and think of the tension required with my lips to make a sound come out of a brass instrument. That's how I'm going to play and where I'm going to put that. Am I playing with the strings? Okay, that's about lifting and placing a bow and friction and weight. So I'm going to play it like that, you know? But because our instrument speaks immediately, where we put it, we have to wait or anticipate or place right in the middle of the pocket. And that is the beginning of the sound and the placement for the whole orchestra sound, right? And so the timpanist really determines so much of the character of an orchestra's signature sound, which is why when I heard Cloyd Duff play, I started buying every Cleveland Orchestra recording I could to understand like how does he shape and move that orchestra, as opposed to Saul Goodman in the New York Phil, or as opposed to Hinger in Philly, or you know, in all these different orchestras. And it was so illuminating. And that's still what I think of when I'm playing with a pit band. It's a little different because we have a click, so then you're in relation to a click. But when I'm playing with an orchestra with Kristen, and I'm like, okay, I need to lean forward and bring the orchestra with me here. Okay, I need to make sure that like my snare drum is a little bit later so that the string players relax in this part of the tune, because I know Kristen's gonna get soupy here and whatever. And like I think that is like 1,000,000% informed the drum set player I am, is thinking like a timpanist, because the timpanist's job is to be the tonal and rhythmic center of a full orchestra. And that's a lot of responsibility.
You know, I didn't do very much at all. I mean, I don't think the last time I really played like in an orchestra was in college, and I was in the concert band. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was trying to keep up, but that wasn't my major in college. It was, just a serious hobby, and I just loved it. I loved being in the fine arts building because I was in the marching band, and so I did that a little bit. But being in New York, you're going to run across situations where you're going to be playing with a bigger group, and being even in a band like Ain't Too Proud, there's a lot of people and playing with violins. But when I did Cats, I subbed for Bill Lanham at Cats. Now, I didn't realize how different that was, and the approach that Dave Roth had when it came to playing his percussion setup, and even starting the show out, and it was a different feeling and different way of doing things. Like you said, for most pits, we're playing with a click or playing with a music director that's going to set the tempo pretty rigidly. At Cats, they went with the downbeat like this, and like another half second later, that's where Dave would start. So I'd have to play along with him, and I was like, I had to feel where he was setting the introduction to the entire show, and then even certain other things where he'd play the timpani or play a triangle part, and I had to play along with him. I'd had to like feel it. It was more elastic than the things that I was working on, so it was a different vibe. So it's a whole other thing, and it's just interesting to learn how classical players play.
It's really interesting because it helps your ensemble playing so much when you think like that, and it also is really telling when you get a music director that has never done that. Like you get a music director that hasn't had a lot of practice listening and breathing and reacting, and has only done like cabarets and following singers, right? Because it's a real different thing. And then you get someone, you're lucky, you get to play with Sheldon all the time. So it's like, someone like him that's like listening and like music directing by where he puts things, not by where he shows things, and it's a whole different experience,
Yeah. I've learned that there are people that music directors that play and they do the cabaret thing because they're used to playing piano, and them being all the rhythm, and they're stomping their feet to keep the dancers or the singers in line, and then when they play with a band, it's different because they're not used to being part of an ensemble. They're not willing to relinquish that control. And then there's other people that come from a band perspective that want to just groove along and don't have the way to conduct in a certain way.
Yep.
And then there's the conductors that play in the orchestra where you got to follow that very elastic tempo. And it's such a thing that, you know, having these experiences makes you a much more well-rounded musician.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to keep you too much longer. We can talk for hours and hours, but I have a question for you. Where can people find you? And, you know, do you give lessons in social media other than Facebook?
Oh, man. I wouldn't say that I'm like Gene Hackman in the conversation, but I kind of keep off the grid to an extent. I'm on Facebook, and that's probably like the easiest way to find me. And one of the reasons I stay on Facebook, to be perfectly honest, is I do find that I get work through there because it's an easy place to find people. So it's just Damien Bassman, Damien Bassman. I'm on Facebook, and you can find me there. And I don't do very much promoting of what I'm doing, but I do usually promote when my band plays. So I will always post, like, if I'm playing with like Lauren or something like that. That's my project. And but no, I'm not on Twitter or Instagram or I don't have a
TikTok.
It's a fun, yes, Snapchat. You can find me on Friendster.
MySpace.
My MySpace page is still there somewhere. Yeah, no, I and it's not anything against it. I just, like, you know, I just am. It's just one more thing that you have to look at all the time that takes me out of being present where I am, and I have enough pull from the phone with just texting and email that I don't, for me personally, I just don't need too many other options. But Facebook is a great way to get in touch with me and find out what I'm doing, and you know, email, whatever. But yeah, that's about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Damien Bassman, the amazing person. I love this chat, and thank you for taking time out. We will definitely talk soon.
Thank you for having me, man. It was really a pleasure, man. Always.